نشكر السيد خالد رضا على ما قدمه من معلومات قيمة. والآن نواصل فقرات الملتقى الثالث للموارد البشرية لعامنا الجاري، ونتابع في الدقائق التالية عرض تقديمي حول إدارة الذكاء الاصطناعي والموارد البشرية. تقدمه بروفسور ميلودينا ستيفن من جامعة محمد بن راشد للإدارة الحكومية، فلتتفضل مشكورة.
Thank you so much for having me. So I represent the Mohammed bin Rashid School of Government. Most of you perhaps have heard of us. We were set up in 2005, and our mandate was good policy and governance. Now, Sheikh Mohammed had this vision where we would be the leading public policy institute in the region and in the world. So our mandate is really heavy on us because good governance, especially when our country wants to be number one, puts a huge amount of responsibility on our shoulders. So what I would like to do is perhaps explain some of the things on AI, especially right now with the Metaverse conference going on. So I think this will be a slightly different perspective. Before I start, maybe I'd like to ask a question. On a scale of 1 to 5, how happy are you? And I'd like you to hold up your hands and show me how happy you are. So 5 is very, very happy. Okay, 10 there. Some people aren't sure how to answer. Okay, this is also interesting. So just remember that. Some people had their hands up with 5. Vast majority didn't answer at all. So this is data. AI depends on data. And when none of you are answering, then I will just take the answer of the 1% that put up their hand, which was extremely happy. So you already see the challenges for you in human resources right now. So just to get us all on the same page, I'll just go through what artificial intelligence is, because sometimes I feel like we don't understand it properly. I'll talk about the market potential. I'll talk about AI and HR. I'll build on what Khalid did. Especially, I'll look at AI and HR with respect to Dubai. I'll talk about sustainability because of COP28, which UAE is hosting, which is very important for us. I'll briefly mention governance, and I'll talk about values and highlight how important that is. So first of all, let me start with artificial intelligence. Very simply, not taking technical terms, it's just hardware plus software plus data. And behind each one of them is a human. It's humans that build the hardware. It's humans that probably program the software. It's human data that makes AI run. So this itself tells you the role of humans in that. If a human makes a mistake in the hardware, if a human makes a mistake in the software, if the human data is incorrect with the example that I just showed you right now, AI will not work. So you as human resources who decide to go and adopt HR, and I think the responsibility is heavy on your shoulders because you set the way for the organization, need to understand how important this is. So how did this whole term AI come up? It started in 1956 in a conference, and before, let me just explain, when NASA was putting a man on the moon, when they talked about computers, they talked about people. Because people were the ones who did the calculations. It wasn't machines. And then the people got replaced with IBM computers, right? So we delegated the responsibility to the machines. Now, in 1956, when they talked about AI, they were very clear in the conference. Can we create machines that can, in some way or form, imitate human intelligence? So the first problem is, what is human intelligence? And there were many mixed thoughts. For example, they said human intelligence means different things. Is it the way we calculate numbers? Even something as simple as walking is very difficult for a robot because the human body is so constructed. So what does human intelligence mean? And they tried to do this using this combination of hardware, software, and data, right? So I want to just show one example. So there was a study about a worm, and they found out in the worm's brain there were 302 neurons and 7,000 connections. So they should be able to figure out how intelligent the worm is, right? But the scientist who was researching the worm said, we don't even know 10% of what this brain is like. I can't understand the brain of a worm. Let's look at the human brain. The human brain has 86 billion neurons and 100 trillion connections. So how intelligent is the machine going to be when we don't even understand the intelligence of a human brain? Considering that AI is supposed to mimic human intelligence. So already we see there are some differences in what we mean by AI and the responsibilities that we're going to give it. Now, just as another example, because we're talking about sustainability, the human brain runs on energy of 20 watts. So all these devices that we use are very energy intensive. So we haven't yet come to a machine as smart and as energy efficient as the human brain. So if machines are not yet at the level of human intelligence, how much of oversight do they need, and how much do we delegate to them? And I'll come with this bit by bit, because this responsibility is yours, thankfully not mine. I just inform you about the responsibilities. So let's look at the potential of AI. When the pandemic came, it became really important that we embrace AI. We didn't have a choice. We were shut down, we didn't get out. So we could see on one form it was a way of us keeping social interaction. In a place like UAE, where 80% of us are expats, it was even more harder for us when we had families across the world and we could not be in touch with them, right? So on the backdrop of this, we found out a huge adoption of things like extended reality. So right now there's the Metaverse conference going on, and part of the Metaverse is extended reality. So just for me to explain this, because it's important too, extended reality is a continuum. This was introduced something like in the really early in the 1930s. On one end is real environment. This is physical, where we are today, what we eat, breathe, and see. At the other extreme is virtual reality. So virtual reality can be 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional. So these are immersive experiences, right? And in between is a combination of mixed reality. So the augmented virtuality, and there's an example of a picture. And this is interesting. This is robots doing surgery. So I think this is called the Da Vinci robots, is where you take a physical object, insert it in a virtual environment, and then you can go and maybe use the manipulations in the virtual environment to do things. On the other hand, we have augmented reality, and this is an example of Pokemon Go. Maybe some of you have played Pokemon Go, or your children have played Pokemon Go. Billions of dollars, they made a lot of money, but this is where you take virtual reality and you superimpose it on the real world. So you can see these fascinating new examples coming in. And right now we're all talking about a metaverse, which is a type of extended reality. Now the extended reality market was valued at 1 trillion which is about 1% of the global GDP, right, US dollars. The metaverse is valued at 8 to 13 trillion, 13 times. So huge potential, very early stages. Anything that we're early in means lots of governance challenges. So we really have to have discussions on how we will govern it really well and make sure it's for the benefit of the people. Because if we are working for the government, our responsibility is very clear. It's public value. So it's for the benefit of the people. Right? So let's look at this in terms of human resources. So again, just to give you an idea of scale of how crises or events can happen, we saw in November of 2019, perhaps some stories coming out of China. February 23rd, we imposed curfew. March 26th, borders were sealed. April 6th, lockdown. You had few months or even less than a month to prepare. And that requires a tremendous amount of responsibility and agility on your side, right? So if we look at what people were saying about AI and HR before the pandemic, we were saying, okay, yes, people said it had significant value, but they were not planning to onboard AI. They said maybe in 5 to 10 years. There was no, catalyst for making them adopt it. Most people were worried about what jobs will be lost, so what jobs will remain, what jobs will go away. But post-pandemic, we found out that everyone quickly adopted AI, and in fact, a lot of it was around remote working, right? So there's tools for how can we help employees work, considering the challenges there are, and keep them safe. So this is also important for governments. We often work with this thing of we have to decide priorities. So health became a more important priority at this point in time, right? So Let's look at some of the challenges that they had. So we see the struggles. A lot of it was technical, because where do you get the technology? Borders are closed. How quickly do you onboard that? Balancing family and needs. And we also saw that there was this issue of feeling socially isolated. But this for me was interesting, because work-life balance was both a positive thing and it was negative. So what does this mean? Because we talked about data. When I get data like this, you as HR, how do you analyze that? Do you choose whatever's positive to support your case? Or do you also look at what's negative? Because you need to look at both. Sometimes, very often, we are presented use cases that are positive only, and it looks very attractive to say yes, but you need to ask the question about what went wrong. And this is a great example. Why are half the people saying it didn't work and half the people saying it did work? And I think more important for me is this question of social isolation. So if with telework, people were feeling more isolated, is this a good thing or a bad thing, especially when our mandate is well-being? Right? Especially when we say society, and a cohesive society is what Sheikh Mohammed uses as the word, is our pillar for growth. So we need to look at these things very, very carefully when we onboard new technologies. I think also currently, right now, HR is facing this tremendous problem of silent quitting, which you've heard about. People physically turn up for work and don't do anything much. So on one hand, you have employees who are highly productive. On the other hand, you have employees who show up, but maybe take 2 or 3 times the amount of time to do the work. And maybe the question is a well-being question, I don't know. But have we asked enough questions to find that? Now, AI is very strange. If you don't ask the right questions, you won't get the right answers. So those insights that Khalid spoke about are critical in building a strong AI. The other thing I think is very important as we unload these new AI technologies, I see very often a KPI as productivity, productivity, productivity. And we keep comparing ourselves with machines. We are not machines. We were never meant to be machines. So I think this is also important. What is the role of the human and what is the role of the machine in the workplace? So some of the new AI technologies, and I won't go through this because Khalid went through them again, but we are talking about things like, I feel undercutting everything is values, values, values. That's the heart of any digitalization process. If your values are not correct, you will fail. And how much likely are you to fail? 70% of all digitalization efforts in the government sector have failed. This is a statistic very well known, right? So I think it starts with values. I don't think, I know it starts with values. So let's look at particularly DGHR. And I went to the website and I said, let me see what we speak about there, because maybe I get a sense of what values are important or what priorities are there. And what was interesting for me is most of it revolves around skills. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but if this is the focus of what we're trying to do is skills, I have some insights that MBRSG has been doing currently right now. Prior to the pandemic, we did a workshop, and we tried to understand what skills are necessary for an agile government. And it was very fortunate this was prior to the pandemic. And we clubbed them as 3 specific skills. At lower management, we said it was policy entrepreneurship skills. These are skills for young employees, and this is the time that they take risks, get out of their comfort zone, try and understand the job, and try and advocate for what they feel that they require for a strong, robust government. The second skill, which is middle management, is boundary spanning skills. These are people who are connectors. They work not only within their organization, but across departments, both horizontally and vertically, and across organizations. This was important. With the pandemic, we saw if you could not collaborate with other organizations, we would never have solved the problem, nor would UAE have been so successful. And the third, which was the transformational skills, which is a senior management level skills, was about leadership. But it was interesting when we asked employees, what are you looking for in your leaders? They all said, we don't want them necessarily to solve all the problems, but we want them to empower the team to to solve the problems. So what was interesting when we did this study was, just because you were a good policy entrepreneur did not make you a good boundary spanner, nor did it make you a good transformational leader, which meant we needed to reskill our employees for each level of promotion. I'm not sure we necessarily do that. So this becomes an interesting area where we feel perhaps there's an opportunity for more work. Can AI help? So let me just start with the data. There is no consensus on the skills for the future currently right now. We went and looked at literacy skills, and we looked at across, World Economic Forum, the British Council, OECD. We even looked at it with the National Advanced Skills. We did not find that they all coincided. So here's policy entrepreneurship skills, here's boundary spanning skills, and here's transformative skills. So when the data itself does not have consensus, how would an AI work? Because you need to have created a model where you understood what you required. Now, it could be that each organization requires different skills, and that's okay. But are you working with your provider to actually determine what type of skills you have? If you haven't done that, then the data cannot be trained, and then the output of that AI will be wrong. So it's really, really important that we try and understand that when we choose these models, that we understand sometimes even some of the service providers come from countries that may not necessarily reflect what we want for our country. I thought I'd give you an example of Amazon. In 2004, Amazon began an experiment, and they said, can we use AI for recruitment? They looked at 500 computer models, they looked at 50,000 terms, and they ranked the CVs on 1 to 5, right? In 2015, they realized there was some sort of bias. In 2017, they shut down the entire program. So in 13 years, when they ran this model, there's a good chance that the resumes that they chose were incorrect. Well, they got people to fill the job. Were they the right people? Could they have better candidates? And it's interesting, where did the bias come from? And when you looked historically they had more men than they had women working in Amazon. So the AI automatically taught itself men are better than women. And so it chose men over women when the candidates came in. So here's an example of historical bias, right? And when I think of social media, can I just see how many people are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok? Ooh, so not many people on TikTok. If I use social media to now figure out your habits and behaviors, if I choose TikTok, I'm probably going to get a much younger generation, right? If I'm going to use maybe Facebook, I'll get an older generation. But not necessarily all of us are represented again over there. So always we need to ask this question, is the data that I have good, and is it representing the target audience from which I'm collecting things from? Now, if I look at the 2030 AI strategy that His Excellency Omar Ulama went and introduced, he talked about putting a UAI seal of approval. And there are 4 levels of approval, the first being public sector. So it is very clear we lead. And in the UAE, especially in Dubai, I think the Dubai public sector leads. So what we put a stamp of approval with, we hope the other organizations will follow. So the responsibility of what we put a stamp of approval on becomes extremely, extremely high. I want to give you another example of a government. So this is the great post office scandal in the United Kingdom. And this started in 1996 when UK was digitalizing. So they went and outsourced a platform. Now, the reason why they did this is they had 17,000 post offices and 38,000 office outlets where you could buy stamps from. And this was too much to manage, and to do the accounting was really hard. So they chose Fujitsu, which is from Japan, to go and outsource this. And basically what it will do is it will calculate and tally and give at the end of the day how much has been sold, how much money should have come in, where the shortfalls are going to be. And over the years, they thought that the system was working so well because more than 700 people were caught stealing. Now, some of those people, as we all know, some said, I'm innocent, I'm not guilty, right? But machine calculating, obviously the machine has to be better. So who believed them? One person even committed suicide. But many, many years later, in 2012, they finally realized maybe something is wrong, and they hired an expert team. And in 2020, 25 years later, they realized there was a problem with the software. It was incorrectly calculating. So my question here is really simple. Why didn't they believe the people? Why didn't they get a person to check? Why did we automatically assume that the machine was right? Now, can we punish the machine? Will the machine lose its reputation? Can we put it in jail like they put maybe some of the other people? I don't think so. And it's very difficult to do that for companies too. This was the largest contract outside military given to Japan. So I really don't think the government, it was also an international relations one. But these are simple things that we need to realize, right? Machine and people, who comes first? And if we are people-centric, and if our mandate is actually people, this helps us a lot. So the important thing is data is not knowledge, right? And the insights that we get are critical. I want to give you another example of remote learning. So most of us think remote learning is good, right? Now, here's an interesting fact from a sustainability point of view. If you're not using an electric stove, if you're using an LPG cylinder, then you're producing carbon black, and carbon black is more toxic to the environment than CO2, right? And I think that's fascinating. So maybe we solved one problem and created another problem because more people eat at home, we might say that. So always we're looking at this, cost-plus relationship when we're in the government. So because I talk about sustainability, I thought I would introduce some interesting facts. So Khalid mentioned the importance of culture. So it wasn't just about changing systems and structure, it was changing culture. So let's start looking at this at 3 points. I'm going to look at hardware, software, and data as an example. UE generates 162 kilotons of e-waste, right? And this is pretty high. It is almost similar or more than what European countries generate. Now, e-waste is very toxic to the environment. It is worse than maybe carbon in the atmosphere because it gets into the water. It will end up in the Gulf. It will be in the fish that we eat. It will affect the crops that we grow. So it's something that we need to worry about. And because AI is very much part of our DNA, if the HR department hasn't set a good recycling policy, because I think you're responsible for environment, health, and safety, then this is a problem within the organization. So I think we need to go back and look at this too. Just to give you an idea on types of e-waste worldwide, less than 20% of e-waste is recycled. A lot of it is actually illegally dumped in other countries. So there is this issue from a global point of view also. So we're always asking this question, trade-offs. So yes, I want to do AI. There's no stopping it. But how can we do it better? How can we do it more sustainably? How can we do it with a people-centric mindset, right? Let's take another look. Did you know that every email you send is 4 grams of CO2? So how many of us had onboard training on how to write emails, whom to CC, whom not to CC, and how many times to send emails out? Because if we didn't have that training, and I randomly send huge documents with huge PDF files attached to it, I'm contributing to the CO2 index. So these are simple things that we can do. Some more facts, just to give you an idea. So even a video meeting has a carbon footprint. Using the internet has a carbon footprint. And I just want to ask this question, which one do you think has a larger carbon footprint? The airline industry or using all the gadgets? Using all our gadgets has a higher footprint of carbon than the airline industry. So it's not about, I don't think it's about using less, but using it more wisely and making conscious decisions to know that, right? So just to give you an idea in terms, and this number will double. It will grow exponentially because that's the direction we're going as a world. So sustainability and software. So the beating heart of things like metaverse is artificial intelligence. And there is a lot of debates on good governance of AI. The first one is trust. Does it create trust? Is there transparency and auditability? Now, this becomes hard when you're outsourcing these to know how these algorithms work, but someone needs to ask the question. So I do encourage you to do that. About fairness and bias, like we saw with the example with Amazon, 12 years, the example with UK Post, 25 years. These are not something you find out immediately, but it really requires you to have a ear to the ground and understand that. And then this question of responsibility. So what I have here is all these new technologies and how they're being used, right? And I also have some of these things. So I didn't even know this. I was in Europe just last week, and they have all these electric chargers, but you have to use your credit card to swipe if you want to get your car charged. And I was curious, how much footprint does my credit card swiping have? And it was the same as leaving an 8-watt light bulb on for 1.5 hours, which I was shocked. I didn't know, because many of these things just disappear into nothing. I don't know that it has a carbon footprint. What's interesting is in Europe right now, they're struggling with the energy crisis, as you're aware. So it's a huge topic, right? A lot of this is awareness. How can we do it better? And I did want to talk about AI human teams. So I want to give you one example. Maybe some of you remember the Boeing crash a few years back ago, and more than 200, 300 people lost their lives. There were 3 airplane crashes with Boeing. Now, the story goes like this. Boeing came up with a new plane. There was a flaw in it. So the senior management realized they're always in competition with Airbus. So they went back to their engineers and said, how can we not redesign the airplane? We want to spend the least amount of money. So this is very often what happens with top management. They're very budget conscious. They push back on employees, and they want the least cost. So they went back to the engineers and said, come up with a solution. So they came up with an AI solution. Basically, when there was a problem, the MCAS, which was a system, would push the nose down of the plane to compensate for the defect that the design had, right? Now, they came up with the plane on time. They needed to get regulatory approval. And I feel like this is often what the role of leadership and the board is, because they need to understand the process. Now, they did have experts look at it. The experts said, yes, it's fine. And one important thing, they didn't have it in the instruction book. So they put out the plane, and then they went to their customers. And here's what they told their customers. We believe our plane is the best plane. So much so, we guarantee you, you don't need training. Normally, pilots require training on every new plane. This is what they told all their clients. Sometimes we do this to our employees too. We have a great system. We haven't tested it on you, but it's great. You will love it, I promise you. We're just going to onboard it, right? So this is exactly what they did with the plane. Now, these customers decided to fly the plane, and what happened was, because of some strange combination of problems, it started pushing the plane down. Now, I'm not sure exactly how much time the pilots had to react, because the information varies, but it was 40 seconds to 5 seconds to figure out why the alarms in the cockpit were going out. You have 200 passengers sitting in your plane. You don't know if you're going to live or die because the plane is crashing. It's pushing its nose down. You have a family you love. How much can you do in 40 seconds? You're not a machine. You're a human being. They showed in the Ethiopian airplane crash, the pilot reset the machine 21 times before he crashed and everyone died. 21 times. And I think this is the most important thing. When we as HR create human AI teams, we need to know the role of the human and the role of the machine. We're not the same thing, but we can complement each other. We can do great things together, but understanding the role and at what point the human can override the machine, at what point we believe the human, I think this becomes critical in our journey. So I want to show you this. I'm just going to talk over this. This is made by a human being. So that's an AI music. That music is generated by an AI. The picture was created by an AI, and it won a competition at a fair. Do you think ethically it's right that an AI music and an AI sound, picture gets the same benefits as a human being? Because this is going to be our next challenge, right? What are the rights of AI? When is it called cheating? Because right now, the gentleman who submitted the picture that won a prize, some people are saying he's a cheater, and other people are saying, no, he's not. It's like us using Excel spreadsheets. He just used a tool. So this is also something we will have to decide in the future about what is, the role of AI in everyday lives. So here's maybe something, it's a book that's just coming out in the future. It's some book that I've been writing on. But maybe on a decision model, we need to understand whether, is the process simple? If the process is extremely simple, there can be no harm to human beings. I think you can fully automate it. It's not much of an issue. The question is, you just want a human to supervise it and say, is the results right? If it's a decision augmentation, you want a combination of human and machine, right? And you want the human to be still critical and ask, is the results valid? Is the data that fed into the machine correct? Is the output actually knowledge that I can take decisions in? Because we know from past examples, even use cases can be wrong. And the third one is decision support. And this was interesting. This is coming from Gartner, right? And they do a lot of the trends for AI. They're saying when it's complex, when it's chaotic, you always want the human in charge, not the machine. So I think this is really interesting, but I think the bigger question for you as HR managers is who's accountable if it fails. And that's a huge one, right? So is it the regulators who's accountable? Well, you're the regulators. Is it leadership? Who in leadership? Is it the board member? Is it the senior team? Is it the departmental head? Is it the manager responsible for deploying the technology? Is it the manager responsible for payment? Because we know purchasing plays a tremendous role. Is it the IT manager? Is it the purchase manager, the engineers? Who's responsible? Because when it fails, someone has to be responsible. And that's a good place to start when you're deploying new technology, is asking the responsibility question and the accountability question. Here's another important fact that I think is important, because I saw so much about skills and jobs. AI will destroy 85 million jobs and create 97 million jobs. And I want to just bring us to where we are. UAE is in a conflict-prone region, so the region has a lot of young talent. In fact, the Middle East will contribute 3.4 billion people. Now, the new jobs that are being created by AI, and this is also interesting, there was a study done in UK, they found most of these new jobs are actually lower paying jobs. They're not higher paying jobs, right? So this raises the question, if we need to keep the region stable, what kind of jobs do we need to deploy? And how will AI help that? So I think when you're adopting AI, also the question is what new jobs can be created and how can we support the region? Because this will be important in peacekeeping. I know that we have a new robotics strategy, and this is also interesting because the robotics market is going to grow by 100 times in the future. I just want to give you an idea of why I think we need to have these discussions. So if the airplane took 68 years to reach 50 million users, Facebook took 3 years, how many years did Pokemon Go take to reach 50 million users? Anybody? Less than 3 years? How many people say less than 3 years? Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, good. Less than half a year? Yes? Yes? Do you know it took 19 days? Now you tell me how agile your government is on decision making when a crisis comes like this. 19 days to reach 50 million people. So you can't just take it back and say, I changed my mind. 50 million people reach. So the more we talk about what could go wrong at the beginning will help us build much better systems, because the rate at which we're deploying technologies is very, very fast. So let me just come down to values very quickly. So when they did surveys, and this is a Deloitte survey in 2020, who is responsible for well-being? Most people said it was the job of the HR manager. So it's back in your court, right? So you have a tremendous responsibility. And if I borrow from our leaders, His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed said, we want to be the most prepared country for artificial intelligence. So we have to have dialogues on governance and how do we manage AI. And if I look at the 10 rules of leadership, the first one is serve the people. So the question is, who is the people? I sometimes find this very interesting in the private sector, for example. The people becomes the customers and not the employees. I always think if you're going to show good values, you first start with your own employees before you talk about external stakeholders. So good part to start is look within the organization and serve the people. All right, so we're at this tipping point. There's a tremendous amount of opportunity with AI, and I think we can do fantastic things. As a small country, we are agile. We have empowered leadership that wants us to do fantastic things. We can set a standard for the world. The world actually will run around in circles trying to figure out governance, but we can do it together. But we need to start this dialogue right now together. It cannot be just one department that does that. And with that, I would like to thank you. And if there's any questions, please feel free to ask questions.